The next section we're going to work on is the compute sum section. And in here we again want to get two values. So I'm going to use input text boxes to do this. And so I'm going to set their type equal to text. And I'm not going to use name. Name, by the way, is used for server-side script languages, often use name values. We're not using those, but we're going to use ID because we're working with JavaScript. We want to get the ID on this one is num1, and I want to label it, and I'm going to set that equal to for num1, and I'll put a label on here, enter the first number, and then I want to do this again. So there's 1, and now I'm going to do 2, enter the second number. Notice all the details I have to change. num2, and the ID on the 4 in the label. All right, so now I've got 2 of those. And yeah, I want to put these in separate paragraphs so they come one after another. And then I'm going to want something that I can write to. So instead of using a paragraph this time, how about let's go ahead and do a heading 3 that we want to write to. And we'll call this ID equals sum message. And we know we're going to need a button. So these are all things we're kind of learning and we're figuring out what we need here. So button compute sum. Okay, so we've got lots of things going on here. Now we want to call a function with this button, but we don't have it. So let's go in our JavaScript and create this function. And we're going to call this compute sum. Put the parentheses, the curly braces, and we're going to need a couple of variables. 1, 2, sum, and then we can just simply do, we have to get the values, right? So we want 1 equals document.getElementById, and we want the first one, which is, what do we call them? num1 and num2. So num1. We want to get the value from this. You have to pay attention to whether you want the value or the inner HTML. They do different things, and the value gets the value that's in an input box. And we want to do that same thing with num2. We want to get its value. And then we want to write, we compute the sum. Now this time we're going to be adding, so we'll do 1 plus 2. So now you see the operator for plus in JavaScript is just the plus. And then we want to write .getElementById, and to write, well, we have to figure out which one we're going to get. So let's go see what this is. This is the sum message. So we're going to get the sum message, and to write to it we use inner HTML equals, and now let's make this longer. Let's say, notice how we can do, right? So far we've only done one variable, but we can actually do lots of variables in a single write statement. The sum of, and now let's put 1, the sum of that number, and notice I'm adding spaces inside of the strings where I want them, and 2 is and I want to finish it off with a period. Okay, so it's a string, the sum of, plus a variable, plus a string, plus a variable, plus a string, plus a variable, plus a string. So you can just make that as long as you want and put as many different variables as you want in there and write it to there. And now we have this function, so we can go ahead and call it with the onClick attribute of the button. and be sure and put the parentheses on the name. All right, we've done a lot of coding. Let's go see if we got it all quite right. You want to check pretty often, and this one was kind of not too often. So 7, we had to do quite a bit before we could do much. Let's do 7 and 4 and see what the sum is. So notice it did say the sum of 7 and 4 is 74. Oh, that's not what we want. Notice it got the values 7 and 4. It wrote them out the way we were hoping, but the sum is not quite right. And this is important to know. When you get a value, so we're in JavaScript and we're getting values from text boxes, it turns out that these come in as strings. And when you add two strings together, it concatenates. It puts them one string up against the other. So it got a string 4 and a string 7. It put them together. That made a 47. Whoops. It got a string 7 and a string 4. Put those together and it made 74. So concatenation is not what we wanted. So instead of being 4, now that we want to do math, notice with multiplication, it converted them to numbers for us. So it said, oh, fine, if I'm going to multiply two things, I only multiply with numbers. So it automatically converted, and JavaScript is really flexible this way. It's a very loosely typed language. Notice when we're defining variables, we're not specifying what type they are. And JavaScript will let them be different types. It works with them in context to figure out the type. But when we add two together, it actually can add strings. We've been doing that a lot, right? We've been adding strings together up here, up here. We've been adding strings a lot. And so we know JavaScript can add strings together. So there's no reason to convert them from strings to numbers. It won't happen automatically. But we can manually do that. So one way that we can do that is with the function parseFloat. And what parseFloat will do is it will take that string and return a numeric value, in this case a floating point number, in response. No, it's not changing what's stored in the variable. It's just taking that string and converting it to a number for its use right here. So we want to use this built-in function parseFloat to convert those to numbers, and then it will add those two numbers together. Let's see how it does with the sum. Now if we refresh and we add a 7 and a 4 and we compute the sum, now it converts them to the number and then adds them together. So we get the sum of